I know some stories you've never heard.
I'd like to hear them.
Well, when I was, this is before I started the kindergarten, I heard that Tom Mix, a cowboy, and his horse were going to be at Fairland Park. We lived about 8 blocks from Fairland Park in Kansas City. And I begged my folks to take me down there to see that cowboy and that horse. And they was busy, they wasn't paying much attention to me, so I just took off, started going down there. Well, I got within about a block of the park, and here come my dad.
Uh-oh.
And so, but he kind of felt sorry for me, so he took me on down to see the cowboy. Now this was a famous cowboy in those days, and he had this beautiful horse, and he did all kinds of tricks with a lasso rope. And the big deal, though, I went down to see this, he'd ride this horse and he'd jump over a car. And boy, I thought that was something else. From that time on, I was anything that I'd cut pictures out of the magazine and get on it and ride it. I was going to be a cowboy. That's my first experience of running off from home. Did you ever run off from home?
I never did.
Never did? Okay.
I knew better.
One time, we'd moved down on the farm, and my job was to milk cows, do the chores. We'd had about 3 old cows to milk, and we'd get about 2 buckets of milk out of those cows. And we'd milk one, get a bucket about full, and you'd hang it up on the hook back on the wall while you milk the other cow. Well, we had an old cat, and she'd keep climbing up there and trying to get in the milk. And I tried to chase her away, and as soon as I'd sit down and milk the next cow, she'd climb right back up. So I went and caught the old cat, and I took her around the other side of the stall there and tied her up. Binder twine around her neck and tied her up so she wouldn't get the milk while I was milking. Well, I finished my milking. I forgot all about the cat. And I went on, and a couple of days later, my dad cornered me. He said, "Vic, you know anything about this cat? Come in here." I didn't know a thing about it. And there it was. Cat had tried to get away, and I tied it in a slip knot and choked the cat to death. It was dead. The cat was dead. My dad liked that cat. And boy, did he give me a spanking. He said, "I ain't spanking you for killing the cat, but I'm spanking you for lying to me." I learned that I wasn't supposed to lie. But I had another case where I got a second training on that. Got big enough to drive, and I was going to go take my cousin down to some kind of doings at the Grange Hall down in Cadmus.
Which cousin?
Mabel Fern.
Okay.
Mabel Fern. And I was driving, he had a brand new Pontiac, 1936 Pontiac, so I must have been 12 years old. And I went and picked her up, and we was coming back to Cadmus, and I just got behind the car, was going kind of slow, and I started to pass it, and I got just about around, and here coming a car from the other direction. Boy, I stomped on it, and I just pulled in just in time, and I heard something go ting, and I went by, and I pulled around that car, and went on down and parked it, and got out and looked, and there was just a little old tiny dent and scratch in the back fender of that car. Well, I never said nothing about it. I drove it home. My dad and him went on to work. He come home from work the next Friday night, and he said, "Vic, come out here. You know anything about this scratch in the car?" And no, I didn't know nothing about it. He says, "Boy, you got to learn not to lie." He'd been down to the filling station. They knew all about it down there. There's a guy that passed, so I stopped and told him. And I got my second good flogging for telling him a second lie. I don't think I ever lied to him after that. You ought to know a good story to tell us of some kind.
You're the storyteller.
We went to, after we got married, went on a hunting trip out in Colorado. And this is my fish story. We had to pack back up in the mountains on the Marvine Lakes, two beautiful lakes up there in the mountains. And it's about 15 miles from where you could get with a Jeep. You had to go on horseback. And we had a camp right on one of the lakes. And we had a little rowboat. We could row out in the lake and go fishing. But when I got up there, boy, I got excited about going fishing because you ride a horse along the bank, you just see all these beautiful trout lined up along the bank. Boy, just about a foot to 18 inches long. So we got there and we had fly rods. And I went out there and I tried to catch some of them from the bank. Now, they wouldn't bite. They just wouldn't bite at all. My uncle, who was a guide up there, he said, well, get in the boat and go out there in deep water and they'll bite. Boy, he was right. We'd go out there and you could see those fish down there, the water's so clear. And just drop your line down there and boy, they'd bite it. Your cousin Elrin he was rowing the boat and when I'd catch one, well, he'd take a dip net and dip it get it in the boat. Well, we caught about a half a dozen of them, and this time, boy, I got one. I thought, this is a big one, man. This fish is a really big one. And I was pulling it up there, and he said, don't look any bigger than the last one to me. He said, oh, no, there's two of them on there. We had two hooks, one hook about that far above the other. They had a fish on each hook. That's my fish story. Those are nice trout. When you cut the heads off and the tails off, they'd be about that long. You just open them up. And just fill a frying pan. And they was really good eating. It was really good eating. So that's a fish story. I know you have some kind of story to tell out there at Parker. I know you went to town and got candy or something, I don't know.
I was supposed to buy a loaf of bread, and I went skating. That's the most trouble I ever got in. Well, I remember one time we was on this poor old farm down there, and this was during the Depression. And I was 12 years old. And, you know, if we had anything meat to eat, we had to kill it. I mean, you had to go hunting for it. And I'd get squirrels and rabbits. One day, I got home from school, and there was an old goose out in the wheat field there, about 200 or 300 yards out from the barn. Boy, I'd get that goose. And I didn't have any shot. I'd run out of rifle shells. So I had to jump on my old pony, and it was a mile and a half to Cadmus to get some rifle shells. And I ran him all the way down there and run him all the way back. And old goose was still out there. Well, it was a long shot. I was afraid if I went out there very far, I'd scare him up. And so I started creeping out that way. And I thought, well, maybe I can hit him from here. So I took a shot at him, some feathers flew at him, but he took off, flying. Oh, geez, he got away. He started flying around behind the barn. I run around the barn, got on a fence post, and I took about a 12-foot bleed on him and pulled the trigger, and you could hear that bullet hit him, but plop, and down he come. So we had goose to eat. That's my first thing I hit flying with a .22. But I got to where I could kill rabbits on the run with a .22. I was hunting them all the time. And I did. My granddad says, you got to learn to shoot quick and accurate. He was telling me how to shoot. He said, now, we used to hunt jackrabbits out in western Kansas. He said, now, anybody can shoot a jackrabbit. They're big, and you hit them. But the trick is, if you want to have some good sport,
when the jackrabbit jumps up, you shoot through his ear, knock a hole in his ear. He'll get it when he starts to run. He'll catch his toenail in that hole, and you can go up and pick him up. I know that was a tall tale, but made a good tale anyway. We didn't have very many jackrabbits in Kansas, but I was looking for one to see if I could hit him in the ear. I never did find one. You know, I don't know, did you ever go Halloweening before we got married?
No.
You never? Gee, we used to go all the time. A bunch of us kids there at the Cadmus would always go out on Halloween night. And we wasn't up to no good. That's for sure. One night there was about a half a dozen of us. Old Meade Harold down there. We'd Halloweened him before, and he was going to be sure that nobody got to Halloween that time. We went down there, and we was always take his buggy and do something with it. We couldn't find the buggy. But sure enough, he'd hid it, and we found it out behind the chicken house. So we took that buggy, and we took it all apart, took all the wheels off of it, took it up about a half mile up a hedgerow, and left it there, and then took the nuts that hold the wheels on, took them down and put them in his toolbox in the barn. And he like to never found those nuts to put on. I think it's about 6 months before he got his buggy back.
Together.
Yeah. Well, he knew who it was, but he didn't know for sure who it was. Then we carried that tradition on after we got married. her stepfather, he wouldn't go back at Halloween. He had those hound dogs, and nobody going to get her out there. Of course, we knew the hound dogs.
They knew us.
They knew us. So we got her best friend, her husband, and come up through the field to the farm there, and hound dogs made friends with them right away, and we Halloweened old Albert. What all did we do? He had a bull, it's kind of mean, and
You put a saddle
put
on
a
him.
saddle on that bull. and we took the wheels off his wagon, put them up in the hay mow, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you strung out some wire.
Yeah, we'd take baling of wire. Albert always got up real early in the morning with the lantern and went to do his chores. Dark, you know, it's always dark. So every doorway, we'd stretch baling wire across about that high off the ground. And it was the funniest thing. We never said anything, you know, and we'd go over and visit Albert. And he would just try to pump us to find out who was Halloween. I don't think he ever knew, did he? I don't think so. Even if he did, he didn't let on anyway.
He would have told you if he
Oh, yeah. He got a kick out of that. Somebody had Halloween him. Yeah. We used to, about the time we got married, a lot of other young folks was getting married too, you know. And they'd have what they call shivaree. Do you ever know what a shivaree was? Well, that's when somebody gets married. A bunch of their friends and
So-called friends.
so-called friends would come and do something to them. Like, well, I remember, was it the Keitel boy, was that who it was?
Laverne, England.
Laverne, England, that's who it was. Got married. Well, a bunch of us went over there, and of course one of the things we'd do is get up over the door and knock on the door, and then they come out and throw a bucket of water on them, something like that. But we did worse than that with him. We come out the door, we grabbed him and took him down to the well and dropped a flashlight down the well, the bottom of the well, you know, it still stayed lit. I told him, you go there and get that flashlight, and put him down the well to get the flashlight. And then we chopped up horse
Hair.
mane, you know, just chop it up and throw it in their bed. That's terrible stuff. You can't ever hardly get it out.
So
It's honor stuff like that.
stiff and prickly. What'd they do to you?
They put me in the horse tank. Took a half a dozen of them to do it. They do anything to you? We went to one shivaree where you smoked a cigar. I remember that.
I didn't smoke the whole cigar.
They'd have a time at some of those shivarees. Those are old times. You can tell us about when we took Donnie to a movie when he was just a little kid. Just a little bitty kid, wasn't he?
He was pretty small. It was a cowboy show, and they started shooting. He got right down behind the seat and was peeking over the top.
Couldn't get him out of there either. He was scared of that. When I was young, I was always taking a shortcut when I'd go to town or something. You know what shortcuts are, you know? Remember one time I had to go to Osawatomie to get a load of corn. I had to pick up a load of corn, pretty heavy load. This cold wintertime froze up. And there's another road I'd never been down before. I thought, well, that ought to be a shortcut towards home. So wouldn't be out of the way. I'll not go down that road and see what I was down there. Got about halfway down that road, and you know, in those old dirt roads, when it got wet, they'd be deep ruts in the mud. Well, this all froze over, but I got in one of those ruts and it broke through. And the ice, and then I was stuck right clear up to the axle. Couldn't get out at all. Had to come and have somebody with a tractor coming. And my dad come up there and, boy, what are you doing on this road? I was in deep trouble for getting that load of corn stuck. Another time I went to Drexel, Missouri, and had to get some parts for combines. And I was going to take a shortcut coming home. So I took this road. I thought it'd be a shortcut. And I was going down along the river, around the curves, and into the old dirt road. And come around the curve, and there's a cable stretched across the road. This wasn't supposed to be down there. And I couldn't quite get her stopped. Knocked the grill and one headlight out. Boy, was I in trouble that time. I've taken some shortcuts since, but I didn't remember them like I did those. We had that old John Deere #6 combine that break down every day, almost. It was the first combine that John Deere come out with, and it wasn't worth a two. We finally got rid of it and got #7 combine. It was bigger, and it was like an old thrash machine with a sickle bar and some canvas to kick the stuff up in the thrashing machine. It worked pretty good. But the boy, if you got in the mud, it really get stuck with it. One fall was harvesting some wheat, and it'd been wet, and it come a big heavy rain. It was in a field that was just a mire. We got that combine stuck. The guy who had a big tractor was going to go down there and get it, and they got the tractor buried down in there. We had to wait till it dried out before we could get those things out of there. And at that time, the wheat was, a lot of people lost a lot of wheat that year on account of the wet. Too late to harvest it then. Remember the bomb? Remember the bomb?
Sure.
I was selling those Electrolux vacuum cleaners there in Paola, Kansas. And
And the fellow that we'd lived across the street from us when we lived there, nobody could sell him nothing. He definitely wasn't going to buy no vacuum cleaner. He didn't need no vacuum cleaner. His wife didn't need no vacuum cleaner. And I went to see him. I said, well, Mac, I want to come up and I just want to show you. See. And I went up there. I don't know whether they wanted the vacuum cleaner or whether he wanted it or whether I just wore him out. But finally he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. Go out there and look at that Nash station wagon.
Oh, green Nash.
Oh, yeah. He said, I'll swap you that Nash for that vacuum cleaner. I said, I don't have to look, you just made a deal. and we had that old Nash, we drove that quite a bit, didn't we? and, that's the cheapest car I ever bought. It's a vacuum cleaner for a car.
We ended up calling it the old bomb.
We called it the bomb. Sounded like a bomb, looked like a bomb. And you know, somebody told me, I think it was my dad or somebody, he says, it ain't what you know, it's who you know. And I didn't know what he meant. But I learned later on. One time when we lived in Florida, I'd come up to my folks in Kansas, and Loretta had been going to a Bill Gothard conference in Kansas City. I went up to pick her up, and we was coming back, going back down to the farm, and I come through Lewisburg. It's late at night.
I was with you.
He was with me, yeah. And this little old town, you get out to the edge of town, there's nothing there. So I just started speeding up. And boy, just like that, the police had me. Stopped me. I was speeding. And I was guilty. And so he took my driver's license and started giving me a ticket. And he said, where's your license? I said, you know Chuck Light? I said, yeah, he's my brother. Well, he was the sheriff. My brother was the sheriff. He said, oh. Well, just watch it. Tell Chuck I'll let you go. I got out of that ticket. I never had a ticket. Not that I didn't deserve some tickets along the line, but I never had one. Seems like another case, something like that, but I can't think of it now. We had this bad bull when we lived there on the farm. And, the guy told me, he says, you got to watch him all the time because you never know when he's going to take in after you. And I wasn't much afraid of bulls or cattle or anything in those days. And one day I was bringing the cows in, and I ran them through the gate, bring them into the lot, and turned around and started closing the gate, and I heard something coming. Turned around, here's come that bull, coming lickety-split, right at me. Boy. There happened to be a rock about that big around laying there by my feet that I used to kind of hold the gate shut. I just picked that rock up, and he wasn't over 4 feet from me. I hit him right between the eyes, full force. He dropped. I thought, uh-oh, I killed my bull. He kicked around on the ground a little while, and then he got up, looked at me, and jumped up and took off. And from that time on, I never had no trouble with that bull. I'd go out there and I could bend over like I was going to pick something up. He'd run through a fence. He'd go anywhere. One time he got out, my neighbor had a bull, and my bull got over in his pasture and had his bull down. And they've been fighting, and the neighbor come down and says, you got to come get that bull. That's going to kill my bull. So I went up there and he said, you got to be careful. That bull's mean. And I got out of this pickup and Started walking down. He says, you going to walk down there? And I said, oh, yeah. And I walked down there, and that bull saw me coming. I bent over like I was going to pick up a rock, and away he went. He ran right back through the fence and went home. that was, what was his name? Cliff Cady. Cady said, I've seen everything now. But I had my bluff in on that bull. One time we lived in Junction City. It's been about the time Sherry was born or after she was born a little bit. A fellow that worked for me building houses, Ronnie, I got his last name, Ronnie. He would go out to Chapman to play golf with me. And we'd work, and about 4 o'clock we'd run out there and play 9 holes of golf. Well, that's when he would jump the pickup and took off out there, and it was going pretty fast down the road, and a guinea flew up in front of us, come right through the windshield and ran right in old Ronnie's lap, and he thought he was killed. Blood all over everything.
Killed the guinea, but
Killed the guinea, but didn't hurt any of us. Just knocked a hole in the windshield about that big around.
remember when we was on a farm and we used to milk a lot?
Mm-hmm.
And we'd go target practice maybe sometimes.
Yeah.
Then we'd gather the eggs, and then we got to play and catch with the eggs. We'd toss them, and then we got to toss them a little harder.
A little harder.
Till they'd break.
Get eggs all over us. We played rough sometimes.
But we had fun.
Mom's a pretty good shot. Still target. Yeah. A lot of events like that. Yeah, I don't know. Can you think of anything else I ought to be telling?
You drove down to Texas?
Oh, yeah, when I was 12 years old. This is a pretty good little story. I had an uncle named Millard, called him Mill, and he was a plaster, a trade. He traveled all over the country working wherever there's a big job. That's where he went. They used him as a driver to get the most possible out of men during the Depression days. And he'd been down in Texas working, and he bought him a new Packard car, and I don't really know how it happened, but he got caught with somebody's saddle in his trunk of his car, and was convicted of stealing a saddle.
It's a great offense.
And that's a
in Texas.
terrible offense in Texas. So they put him in jail in Texas. Well, my dad and a neighbor went down to Texas, and they put him in Huntsville prison. Huntsville. And we went down and see him, and they got his car and brought it back up to Kansas. And of course, my uncle, he was desperate to get out of that prison, and my dad, he didn't know what to do. And my mom, I think she wrote a letter to his ex-wife, who knew some people, and said, well, why don't you just come down and go see the governor, see if they let him out of prison, if we take care of him up here in Kansas, bring him to Kansas and be responsible for him. So me and my mom took out for Texas in this Packard, 1936 Packard. And you know, I was a pretty big kid, but that old Packard was a big old car, and it had a great big steering wheel. And I just couldn't quite stay over it. I'd look under it, and then I'd look over it. But I drove it all the way to Texas. I drove it fast. Roads wasn't too good, but wherever the roads was straight and there wasn't no traffic to mount anything, and I'd drive 80 miles an hour because we was trying to make a mile a minute, you know. And you get slowed down for towns and stuff. And so we got down there, we got lost at night one time. Had to spend the night out in this post camp where they had a bunch of lumber, like logs stacked up there. And slept in the car, and then we finally found our way. We was trying to had to go to a place where they was building a dam down there to meet some people who knew how to tell Mom what to do. So she got her instructions and everything. We went down to Austin, Texas, capital, went to see the governor. And there wasn't no problem. Mom just went right in and told her what her business was, and went up and saw the governor, and he okayed the thing. Took a little while. We couldn't take him home with us, but it wasn't very long to where he got out and caught a bus and come up there. Well, we went into the Huntsville prison to see him while we were down there. Boy, you talk about somebody glad to see somebody. He was really glad to see somebody who cared about him. Anything to do with him. He came on home. Mom got him out of prison. There's a lot more to tell about that story, but that's the gist of it.
About when Vicki been up
Lines.
when she was a little girl, we had a new house, and her bed was close to the window and it had Venetian blinds. And so she got to fool around with them and got them all bent up. I come in, I said, Vicki, what happened to those blinds? And she says, I don't know, they're just all crossward to bentwards.
I remember one time we lived there in Junction City, I'd had the flu and was pretty sick. Kids wouldn't be quiet. And I got out of bed and I was going to give him a lick, and I couldn't find nothing but a tie.
Necktie.
Because I was looking for my belt, couldn't find it, so I went in there with a tie and gave them all a whipping with a tie. But I did give the kids whippings. I remember I give Jim a whipping, you could start hear him for a block away. I mean,
He was pretty little.
yeah, he sure didn't like to get a whipping.
He was going out in the street, and we lived in this place, this store that had a gas station.
Mm-hmm.
There was lots of traffic by there. So out he went. He told him, he says, don't you go out in that street again. So he just kind of turned and looked, and then away he went again. So.
That was a mistake, wasn't it? What did I for you? Coat hanger?
No, I don't know what it was.
I don't know. I read stripes, so he's like, wait, now I'm mad. I really striped his legs up real good.
I didn't like that.
But he never went out in the street no more. Sometimes the Lord has to do that with us. Give us some pretty good stripes to keep us on the right track. Anyways.
I pulled a cook out of that with the mule.
Oh, yeah. They had a big team of mules. And, they were really good work mules, but boy, were they tough to deal with when you wasn't working them. I'd shuck corn with them all winter, and in the spring, one time I was planting Lespedeza seed on 80 acres that they had there, and I took those mules out and started at daylight, and we worked them clear past dark all day long. Brought them home, put them in the barn, and put some feed in the trough, and went on to do some other chores, and come back in there, and one of them mules laying there dead. Either got choked or had a heart attack. I didn't know what happened to him, but he was dead. I just had one mule. One day, a neighbor had come over with a truck to get a load of hay, big baled hay. And backed in the barn there, and it was another case where it was just froze enough on top to back in the empty truck. Loaded that big old truck, we called it a truck old zoo, with a big load of baled hay, and started pulling out across that barn lot, and that just thawed enough and it fell through. It was in the mud almost up the axle and couldn't go, couldn't move. So I was going to ask, Neil Stropp was the guy's name, said, I have to go get a tractor and see if he could pull it out of there. And I said, well, I got a mule. I believe he can pull it out of there. He said, oh, you got to be kidding, that mule, he's a little team of horses, can't pull that truck out of there. I said, well, the truck will pull some, but I believe the mule will pull it out of there. So I went and got my mule and hooked him on that truck, and shoot, we didn't have no trouble coming out of there at all. That old mule hit that shoulder and that collar, and you could hear the old leather creak and pop, and pulled it right out of there. Put it in the truck in low gear, and it just came right on out. And he said, I've seen everything now. Boy, he said, that's a real pulling mule. And it was really good work mule. It was dangerous otherwise. I had a hired hand. I'd send him over to harness him one morning, get him ready to go to the field while I finished up the chore. And when I got over there, well, he was sitting outside the barn. He says, I ain't going in there with them mules. But when you come in the barn, they start stomping and just throwing a fit, you know. Everybody was a little bit fearful, wasn't about to go in there with those mules. But, their bark was worse than their bite, really. You learned to just go ahead and throw the harness on them. Just do it. And then, as soon as you got the bit in the mule's mouth, they were just as perfect gentlemen. Yeah, they worked as a team, just like as if you had power steering. It really was. I could back a wagon load of corn. If I had that much room on each side, just back it right in a place, and just move a little bit or a lot, or whatever you wanted, and you'll just do it. And it worked good. Very few horses you can do that with. It was a good team of mules.
And she used to sleep with sheep or something?
Oh yeah, when I was sophomore in high school, I had a project and bought, they shipped these sheep in from Texas, and you buy them for $3 a piece. And I borrowed $99 from the Parker State Bank and bought me 33 sheep. Well, they delivered them. They shipped them up from Texas in boxcars to Parker, and then I forget who brought them out to the house with the trailer, And I had my sheep pen all ready for them. But one of the side of the pen was a rock wall. The rest of it was wire fence. But one side was a rock wall, was about 5 feet high. And they dumped those sheep out of that trailer. They just went out of that trailer, out in that lot, and over that rock wall and down the road. I mean, just like deer, man. They're as wild as March hares, I'll tell you. They're really wild sheep. Well, the neighbor's dog come out and barked and got them stopped. We got around them and started back down the road. They went right back down there, went right back over that rock wall, right in that pen. I couldn't believe it. But I'd put out several feeders that I'd made, and I had feed in it. And they found that, and boy, never had a sheep go over that rock wall again. Not a one. I raised those sheep. That winter I slept with those sheep. You know, I was having lambs. And
Smelled like one.
go to school smelling like a sheep. I only had 2 pair of overalls. Had to walk 1.5 miles to catch the bus whenever the roads were wet. Muddy roads. Mud roads, terrible mud. We ain't got no mud here compared to that mud. You know.
Grandma, she had to keep Larry hooked up to the clothesline.
Yeah, my grandma's little brother, when he was little, he'd run off. Mom would have to tie him up, tie him on a clothesline so he could play out in the yard. He wouldn't run away. One time he got away and he's coming over to where we live. He got to, it was muddy and he went a mile, it was 2.5 miles to where we lived. And he got down there and he got about a quarter of a mile up the second mile. And he got bogged down in the mud. He couldn't go no further.
That was Larry.
Yeah, it was Larry, yeah.
Didn't he do something with some cats or something too? Or
Somebody.
did he kill some
Oh,
cats?
yeah, he was canning cats. Putting them in fruit jars.
Little kittens.
Little kittens. Cat had little kittens. Larry's
Put the
putting them
lid
in
on.
fruit jars.
They all died.
Larry did all kinds of crazy things. That's about the time that they come along with, we didn't have any TV or nothing, but they had comics. They had Superman. You know, Larry, he gets him a gunny sack or something for a cape. He's going to jump off the barn. Jumped out of the hay man like killed himself. Then he tried to run through the door, you know, trying to run
Through the screen door.
through the screen door. There's funny things that happen on the farm, boy.
Weren't there some funny things with Don and Jim and Vicky?
Oh, yeah, Mom, you can tell about
You
that.
can tell about in the barn. When we lived west of Pale on that farm.
Yeah?
Don and Jim would use Vicky as a target. Put her in the hay mound and throw.
Yeah. We just got smoking out there in the barn like a burnt barn down.
That's when you used to smoke. That's
Yeah, I
why.
know it was. I smoked it then, so.
Not much, but
Not much, so. Yeah. A lot of crazy things. Had some real old snowstorms out there, and it's pretty flat, and the big drifts in the road.
At the house you live in, you could see the snow or something, or it would drift in.
Oh, that's when we got married, man. We lived in the house and we got up in the morning and be 2 inches of snow on the floor. Blowed in around the windows in the night, you know, just snow all night and blow in.
we were milking a lot of cows.
Yeah, we didn't change clothes very often those days.
And we just go
We'd
to bed
sleep
in
in
all of our
them.
clothes.
Go to bed
It was
with
so
our
cold.
clothes on. Warmer in the barn than it was in the house. Down there with those old cows. I had an old
It was
rickety
nicer,
barn.
too.
It's one of the first barn we had. But I sewed burlap sacks together, got it all sealed up. We put those old cows in there and bed them down in straw. And man, it'd be warm in that barn. The old cows put out the heat, you know. We hated to go to the house. It's wondered we didn't, after Don was born, didn't freeze him to death up there. Oh boy,
I wouldn't have done that anymore.
no.
Go up and leave a little kid in his crib while we went to milk.
We did have a stove. I don't think we did. It wasn't cold for him.
It wasn't cold. He'd come back and he was in some messes.
He made a mess and was playing with something.
Had it all over him, all over his bed. The Lord was looking after us. That's all there was to it.
Yeah, we were just kids growing up. So one time we got dry in the summertime. We went down to check the pond, see if there's still water for the cattle to get water there. And she was with me. We was walking across the dam on the pond, and I looked down, there's snakes everywhere. soon as she saw those snakes, she climbed me like I was a tree. She's pretty active those days, I'll tell you that. So I went high stepping it out of there with her, carrying her. We had a lot of snakes in those days.
Yeah, we got one in the house.
You tell about that.
He was plowing up in the North 80, I guess, wasn't it?
Mhm.
And I saw this snake come along the wall there. And I watched it, and it went into a big overstuffed chair. So I stand on a chair in the doorway, watching it, but it didn't get away. Finally, he came home, and I told him there's a snake in that chair. He said, "Oh no." I said, "Well, you just take a broom and see if you don't hear him." So he did, and that thing would just rattle.
It's a rattlesnake.
And finally, it came out because it was striking so much.
I kept teasing him, you know. Came out and I killed him.
It was small.
About that long, but
It wasn't quite that long, but it was long enough.
there's one of the old prairie rattlers. There's a lot of them up there. One time I was
It scared me to death.
I was on the tractor up there, and I was disking this field, and I picked up rocks and piled them off the field and put them in a pile. And the little pile wasn't a very high pile, but it was about the size of that rug or a little bigger. And I went around that, I was disking around it and just hit a few of those rocks with the disking, and I saw these snakes. And that thing was full of those little prairie rattlers. I've seen them up there before. There's real poisonous if it hits you. I killed a bunch of rattlesnakes that day. I always hated those snakes. I got the job when I was a kid. You know, they always had those old dug wells. It was just laid up with loose rock. And you have to clean them out every year or two. So go down in there and get all the mud out of the bottom and clean out the well. And they put lime in it. It was always my job to be the one down in the well. And the men would pull the stuff up and I'd fill the buckets. And you get down in there and see an old snake up there in the rocks. I always had to clean the wells.
You get me down one of them wells.
Well, they won't bother you. You're busy
They
down
never
there.
went.
No, they didn't go down there. And it was, after we lived there on that farm the first year, we needed to have a bigger well. We had so many cows, and I was going to dig a well. We had a place out there that was a good place for a well, spring running there, and we had a big reservoir. I'd fill up, and we had plenty of water for the cows. So. You couldn't dig it, the well. It was all rock, solid rock. Hard limestone rock. So I went down to the county and got a compressor and a jackhammer, and they had these 4-foot steel bits that you could drill a hole down the rock. I was going to have me a pretty good sized well. I was 25 feet across at least.
It was big.
Big. But I drilled 15 holes, 4 feet deep. And I put 4 sticks of dynamite in those holes. and hooked it up with electric caps and took it out there. When I shoved that thing down, that plunger down, that whole thing just, I'd covered it up with big heavy 8x16 railroad bridge timbers. It just blowed them things off and scattered rock. We was clear up to the house, which was Oh, as far as from here over to Dan's house, and the rocks that big around was landing up in the yard. So we had a hole, a real hole. I went down in there and started taking it out. There's still a lot of smoke and stuff down that hole. Boy, did I get a headache. You ever get a dynamite headache? You got a dynamite headache. I tell you, that was terrible.
He was sick.
I was really sick from it. Then I was going to build me a shed down the bluff, down below the barn there. Had to put me in a shed down there. So I went down there, drilled a whole bunch of holes and put a bunch of dynamite in it. I didn't cover that up with nothing. You know, it was down there quite a ways from everything. And I blowed that thing up. It just made a shower of rock that went right over towards my neighbor. He lived a quarter mile away, but what rock turned his yard. He come over there, you're gonna kill my hogs. But I learned one thing, that we had a bunch of stumps. Boy, you could take a half a stick of dynamite, put it under one of them stumps and just blow him right out. A lot easier than trying to dig and cut him out. Yeah, amazing things you do when you're young and foolish. Yeah. How much time we got left?
About 10 minutes. On the railroad?
Yeah, I was working on the railroad with a team of horses. I went to the bank and borrowed money to buy me a team of horses and harness to, because it's paying good money working on the railroad. So
Just before we got
that's
married.
before we got married, yeah. And I went up and was working in this hot summertime down in weeds higher in your head, and working on the railroad. And first day went out there, had about 30 teams of horses out there, and they were getting lined out and had this work train that was there on the tracks, and it was just sitting there, this little steam running out of it and not making much noise. And then about that time,
Not ready to move it.
the work train got ready to take off. It went, blowed off steam, went chugga 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 chug, and boy, horses went every direction. Horses took off. My team took off with me. I was hanging on the reins, and they didn't pay no attention to that. But I got them one ran on each side of a telephone pole. They had that old heavy lines on it. That stopped them. And fortunately, I didn't have them hooked up to nothing when it happened. Some of the fellows did, and it ruined some of the horses.
Cut their
Cut
legs.
their legs. But the boss come up there and said, "Now, don't you ever let them horses get away from you like that again. You do, you're done here." And a lot of them went home. That was the summer when I spent all summer sleeping under the wagon, staying right out there on the railroad right away with all the horses, and I'd get up and feed everybody's horses in the morning, so when they come ready to go to work, they'd all be ready. That was,
Right up the way, you know, there's this schoolhouse. Remember that school, grade school?
Cadmus?
No, Pony Corner.
Oh, Pony Corner, yeah, that's where you live, yeah. Tell them about Pony
Yeah.
Corner.
They called it Pony Corner because they said that's where the Indians used to corner their ponies to catch them. So I went to all 8th grade of school there, that little old schoolhouse. And I had several students. So that was quite a thing to, I had to walk about 3/4 of a mile to school.
What was your teacher's name, remember?
Alta Hoyt.
Alton. My grade school teacher, I had two. Remember Flea Hardy and Tilly Swarner.
Sounds like old maid cards.
It smelled that way too, boy, I'll tell you.
She must sing your, Sesame Rhymes and sing your Strawberry Rhymes.
Yes, it tells her.
You sing Strawberry.
I had a terrible frog in my throat. I don't know, I can't, you know, the radio came along. That's when I learned about Tom Mix and Death Valley Days, and just to hear all these old songs on the radio. And I don't know if I can remember it or not, but I used to learn to sing this song about the old strawberry roan. I was laying round town just a spending my time, out of a job and not holding a dime, when a feller steps up and he says, I suppose you're a broke bustin' cowboy by the looks of your clothes. Well, he figures me right, I'm a good un I claim. Do you happen to have any bad uns to tame? He says, I got one, he's a bad un to buck. At throwing good riders, he's had lots of luck. Said this old pony ain't never been rode, and the boy that tries it is bound to get throwed. Well, he gets all excited and asks what he'd pay to ride this old pony a couple of days. Well, they offered me a 10-spot, says I'm your man, 'cause a horse never lived that I couldn't fan. Well, I gets in the buckboard and he takes me out to the ranch, stays until morning, and right after Chuck, I goes down to the horse corral, standing alone. Is this Cavaliero a strawberry roan? His legs is all spavined, he's got pigeon toes, little pig eyes and a big Roman nose, little pin ears that touch at the tip, and a double square iron stamp back on his hip. Well, it puts on the blind and it sure has a fight. Next comes the saddle and it screws her down tight. Then I piles on him and lifts up the blind. I'm right in his middle to see him unwind. Well, he bowed his own neck and I guess he unwound. He seemed to quit living down here on the ground. He goes up towards the east and back towards the west, with me in his middle a-doing my best. He sort of gets wobbly and weaving behind, and it kind of gets dizzy and it sort of goes blind. Then he starts in high diving and a turning handsprings, and it takes to the air just like I had wings. Oh, that strawberry roan. Oh, that strawberry roan. The boy that gets on him is bound to get throwed. Oh, that strawberry roan. Now, you tell us something. Some of your poems. Real quick.
Well, I learned this poem when I went to school, and I remember when we used to go to Florida, and I'd say it, and it was right at the time when these things was happening. Like, it was about, lost my thought.
Little butterfly there.
Yeah, it was flowers.
Oh, goldenrod.
Oh, the goldenrods are yellow, the corn is turning brown. The trees and apple orchards with fruit are bending down. The fledges flaunt their harvest on every meadow nook, and asters by the brookside made asters in the brook. The dewy lanes at morning, the great sweet odor rise. At noon the roads were covered with yellow butterflies.
The first time she said that, we was driving down into Florida, and the butterflies, everything, just like what she said.
Is it over? Any final words now to close it out?
Yeah. Well, through all of it, we've had a lot of good times. The Lord's had his hand on our activities, regardless of how foolish we might have been. The Lord's pulled us out and guided us in a new direction from time to time. There's many things we could talk about that would show how his hand worked. We'd have to do that another time when we have more time to talk about the things of the Lord.